All right, let's move on to a schema diagram. A schema diagram is a closer format of how a database table looks like, and a schema diagram can only be drawn from an ER or EER diagram. It cannot be drawn by just simple statements like how we draw a EER and ER diagram with, but a schema diagram can only be derived from an EER or ER diagram. All right, so the format of a schema diagram is that it has the attribute name as the heading, like as you can see, D name, D number, manager, SSN, and all that. These are all attribute names, and these names is the table name or the relation name. Now there are certain rules of drawing a schema diagram, but first of all, I'm going to discuss what is a primary key and a foreign key. Every entity has candidate keys. Candidate keys are multiple key attributes which are underlined, but not all key attributes would uniquely identify each row. So we have to choose one single or maybe double or whatever, a combination of maybe one or more primary keys. Primary keys are the ones which uniquely identifies each row, and primary keys are chosen by us as the database designers or administrators or whatever. Now, the primary keys are always underlined and in the schema diagram, because like I said, every entity could have multiple keys, but not all of them are underlined here. But only the primary keys are just underlined, because you can't, if you just underline the other keys as well, you won't know which one actually is you're using to uniquely identify each row. Okay, and what's a foreign key? Now every entity in a ER diagram is related with each other, but in an ER diagram you can visually see that employee works for a department. But in a table, in a database table, how would you relate employee entity with a department entity? You would have to have the primary key of one included in the other table as a foreign key, because if you're including SSN of employee in the as an attribute in department table, then it's a primary, then it becomes a foreign key. All right, so yeah, that's what a foreign key is. It's just the referencing a primary key from another entity, not its own. If it's own, then it's a primary key. If it's from another table or another entity, then it's a foreign key. All right, so the certain rules that we have for drawing an ER diagram are these. For the first one is that for regular entities, create a relation and indicate its primary key. So you just create a normal relation. A relation is just these tables that you could see in this picture. This is one relation. Department is a relation. Employee is a relation. Department locations is a relation. Okay, so this ER diagram was drawn. This schema diagram was drawn from this ER diagram. Okay, so for normal regular entities, which is employee and then the project, department, but not dependent, because dependent is a weak entity. These are regular entities. If there is a regular entity, you just draw its normal relation table, include all of its attributes, and include a primary key. So that's what we did here. Include all of its attributes and include a primary key, and always underline the primary key. All right, and these arrows are just for referencing the foreign key. We'll come to that later. So the second thing is that for weak entities, create a relation with its name and include its own attributes and primary key of the entity it's dependent on as a foreign key. Now in weak entities, you can't have a primary key, because that's the whole point. That's why it's called a weak entity, because it doesn't have a primary key or any sort of key that would uniquely identify each row. But it has this broken line sort of attribute. This is actually the partial key. A partial key is not actually a primary key or any or any candidate key, but it's sort of kind of it could be the primary key if it's combined with something else. So in this case, a dependent relation is created. So for weak entities, we create a relation with the name of the weak entity, and we include, of course, all of its attributes, and we include the primary key of the other entity that it's related with as a foreign key of this table. So dependent is related with employee, and employee's primary key is SSN. So SSN will be the foreign key for dependent. So let's look at the schema. For dependent, dependent name was there, sex was there, birth date was there, relationship was there, and ESSN is employee SSN. The arrow is pointing towards SSN of employee. So this is the foreign key in this case. All right. And like I said, I always said that you have to just underline the primary key in a schema diagram. In a schema diagram, you always just underline the primary key, but in a ER diagram, you can underline the candidate keys as well. But in a schema diagram, only the keys that are uniquely identifying each row, you underline those. Here, ESSN and dependent name together forms the primary key, not alone. Dependent name alone is just a partial key. ESSN alone is just a foreign key, but when both of these are combined, then these form the primary key. All right. So and this arrow, that all of these relations that has these arrows protruding from it, all these arrows are just referencing the primary key that it has been derived from. So this part is the foreign key and the arrows part is the primary key. All right. So next we move on to for one-to-one relationships. For one-to-one relationship, what we do is, if you can read this, I don't want to read through it, it's gonna just waste time, but I'm just gonna like show it to you what it actually means. For one-to-one relationship, for example, in employee manages department, you obviously created a relation of employee. You obviously created a relation of department. This is the first step. You always create a relation of all the entities, all right, and also weak entities. Now, while like if you want to map the relations in a schema diagram, first you see that in one-to-one relationship, one is a single part, like a single line, and one is a double line. Means one is total and one is partial participation. Optional participation. So what you do is you include the primary key of employee as a foreign key of department. Why? Because as a foreign key in department. Why? Because this is totally participating in this relationship. This is a rule. This is like a rule of thumb. So when you're mapping the schema diagram, include this the SSN of employee into the department table. You obviously at the beginning drew the all the attributes, like created a schema diagram with all of its attributes. Now you just have to add one more and just write the manager SSN. Maybe you just name it as manager SSN. This will be the foreign key, and this references the primary key of employee relation. So the rule states that include the primary key of the entity that optionally participates in the relationship that participates in a mandatory way as the foreign key. And if in the case that both of the entities have total participation, then create a relation with the relationship name. Like for example, if both of these were participating, if employee and department, both of these were participating, then create a relation name that's named managers, and include include all of the attributes of both the entities and all the key attributes as well, and choose any one key as the primary key. That's your wish. But just create a relation with the relationship name managers and include all the entities of both the entities actually. Include all the entities. Oh yeah, that's fine. So include all the entities attributes and choose any one key as the primary key. So that's done. Now for one-to-many relationship. For one-to-many relationship, for example, this is one-to-many relationship. It doesn't matter if it's total or partial participation, but the rule of thumb is in one-to-many relationship, include the primary key of the one side, the entity that's on the one side as the foreign key in the employees, the entity in the n side. So as it states, include the primary key of the entity that's on the one side as the foreign key of the entity on the n side. So employee table would have a foreign key called D number that references the primary key of department, because employee is on the n side and department is on the one side. So the foreign key will be D number that references the primary key of the other side, which is on the one side. All right, so that's done. Now for many-to-many relationship, make another relation name. So for example, what you call, for many-to-many relationships, this yeah, works on is one relationship that's many-to-many. So for many-to-many relationship, you include the primary key of employee, the primary key of project as a foreign key in this relation, and its own attribute. So the schema would look like, the works on schema would look like ESSN of, this is the primary key of employee, P number, this is a primary key of project because employee and employee works on a project, and hours is its own relationships, own attribute, so this is included. And ESSN and P number, both of these, the combination of these would form the primary key of works on relation. So both of these together would uniquely identify each row. All right, the next rule is for recursive relationships. For example, in this diagram, the recursive relationship is supervision. So for a recursive relationship, you include another field or another attribute in the employee table and the employee relation, which would be named, suppose, like supervision SSN, supervisor SSN. All right, why the SSN? Because the primary key of employee is SSN. So we would just like include, for a recursive relationship, we would just include another foreign key that references the primary key SSN, but that foreign key would include the social security number of the supervisors. All right, so that's how the schema diagram looks. The super SSN references SSN. This is another foreign key, and as you noticed everywhere, foreign keys are not underlined unless that foreign key forms a primary key. For example, in this case, in works on, the primary key of both the entities are taken, and both of these together form the primary key of works on relation. So yeah, the rule for recursive relationship is that include a new foreign key that is actually the primary key of the entity itself, but with a different name. All right, so this is done. Now for multi-valued attributes, in this diagram, the multi-valued attribute was locations. For multi-valued attributes, the rule is that include and make a separate relation with an attribute of the same name. So make a separate relation named location because of the same name. As I said, location is the relation name. So another attribute will also be called location name, and include the primary key of department because this attribute belongs to this entity. So include the primary key of department as a foreign key in this table location. So the schema diagram would be D number is the primary key of the entity that it belongs to, and D location is the name of the multivalued attribute itself. And both of these together would form both of these together, or sometimes even maybe just one of them together would form, or just one of them would form the primary key. It depends. It depends if it's specified or not. The assumption in this diagram was made that department number and department location, both of them together would form the primary key for this table department location. All right, now this is done. Now for EER diagram, each subclasses. Now for this, I would just draw it for you. For example, employee had there is an employee relation, and doesn't matter if it's overlapping or disjoint, but the subclasses that are there are designer, developer, manager, project manager, designer, and developer. And each of these have separate attributes, like developer has some programming skills, and designer has some soft like Adobe skills. Maybe I'm just making it up. So Adobe skills like Adobe Photoshop or Adobe like Illustrator or whatever. And project manager has some maybe the attribute is like project that it's managing, the project name. I'm just making it up. All right, so I know it doesn't make sense, but yeah, I'm just doing it for example. So we already would have drawn, and like in normal ER diagram rule, we would have already drawn a table, a relation for employee. But for these three, we would have to draw another relation table. For example, developer table would have another another relation which would have the attribute, the programming skill, and the suppose employee had an SSN. Sorry, I'm so sorry. This is like attributes, so it's a really bad mistake, but everyone makes mistakes. So yeah, these are attributes. So this is SSN, and SSN is the primary key. We just consider about this. There may be name and blah blah blah, but I'm just concerned about this. So the rule is that you have to include the foreign key, the primary key of the superclass as the foreign key in the subclass. So the designer would have Adobe skills and again SSN, and project manager would also have project name and SSN. And of course you would have to like put the arrow and point it towards the actual SSN, which is the employees relation table. If there was an employee table, then these would and there's an SSN attribute, then these SSN would point towards that, because these are foreign keys. All right. So, and also because since the subclasses do not have any key attributes, that's why we underline these foreign keys. Usually we don't underline foreign keys, right? But since there aren't these subclasses usually don't have any primary keys, because they are actually identified with the primary key of the superclass. So the foreign keys itself will be the primary key in case of subclass, superclass, in case of EER diagrams. Alright, so that's about it for EER diagram, schema diagram, and I hope you understood it. The summarized rules that I've laid down over here, I think these will be really helpful to you. If you could pause the video in the beginning and take a picture of it, that would be great, because there are so many slides everywhere and they kind of teach you in a really confused way, and when you have to do a quick revision before exams, these rules that are written in such a simple format would be easy to understand and easy to catch up and skim through. So yeah, I hope you understood, and please like and subscribe if you want more CS tutorials, and good luck.